Well, thanks for coming all. I guess you should probably use this mic. We're going to have this on YouTube later, which is why I have the lights and a microphone. The microphone is for the audio input for the video, so you can hear me. The camera device is the phone right there. So just letting you know. Just a quick note, big shout out to Keenan, Rainwater Studios, for helping out with the AV tonight. Thank you so much. The bathroom is right behind this door. If you got to leave early, it's no problem. If there is an emergency, so we'll have like the 3 of our phones will go off and you'll hear, the alarm and all that fun stuff. Just hang tight, Well, just wait for everyone to kind of come through and out of here before you, move your vehicle or anything like that. Just, keep in mind that. And, really, I'll probably end up staying here because we have, 2 guys here, so I won't leave you guys high and dry. So, cool. So, I guess just go over some basics here. Amateur radio or ham radio. It's a non-commercial radio communication. So you can't do any like business or anything like that over your ham radio. It's all managed and ran by the FCC. The purpose of ham radio is for recreational and service-related activities. Obviously, we have the term ham radio. A lot of the ham radio guys are called hams. And anyone who's of any age, who's not a representative of a foreign government, can get their amateur radio license. You'll need to get your license before you transmit on the air, and then we'll kind of go over that a little bit later on what the different licenses are and what you can do with that. But yeah, I found this super awesome This Is Ham Radio video that I want to play briefly. It's still rewinding. That's right. See right here, they're taking a wire and shooting up at their trees so they get like a super big antenna. Oh yeah, be sure to silence your phones.
Yeah. It's your brother.
My ham radio class. So you can hang out if you want. Oh, you gotta work. All right, that's all I wanted to do. I just thought it was a pretty groovy video. That actually goes on for 15 minutes. I'm not going to watch the whole thing, so. So what's the appeal? There's a lot of different parts of this hobby that I really like. You can do a lot with it. You can get as technical or as basic with it as you want. Some things you can do, you can talk to people on top of a mountain without the cell phone network. You can help with emergency communications. For example, in New York during 9/11, they called in ham radio operators along with Hurricane Katrina. They had over 1,000 ham radio operators help out with Hurricane Katrina. Also, the Colorado flooding of 2013, people helped out. You can communicate with just your voice and a microphone, interface it with a radio or your computer, and away you go. You can even talk to people on the International Space Station, which I think is pretty cool. A lot of people enjoy competing in DX contests where you see how many people around the world you can communicate with in a certain amount of time. And in the United States, there's over 600,000 radio amateurs and over 2 million radio amateurs worldwide. So quite a few people different out there on the airwaves. It doesn't take a whole lot to get started. All you really need is a radio and a transceiver. So transceiver is where you can both transmit and receive the signal. So that's a transceiver. To transmit, you'll need a license, but if you just want to listen, all you need is the equipment. You don't need a license to listen to what's going on with ham radio. Depending upon your goals, you can get real crazy with it or real basic with it. You can get extra power supplies, larger antennas. You can set up a weather station. You can do quite a bit with it. With me, I'm still getting started with this, so I have just the basics. This is my ham radio setup right here. So not crazy, but there's quite a few different things I can do with this, and I'll show you. I think it's pretty fun.
What does ham stand for?
It does not stand for anything, Jim.
Did you think the name
Nope.
just sounded catchy? Or
Yep, I think the name just sounded catchy. It's been around forever, so I don't know. I have no idea where the name comes from. It's a good question, though.
maybe the creator of ham radio really liked ham.
It could be. There's a few different types of radio devices you can use. I'll go over what the difference is between the equipment. But just a couple of, just real quickly on this, there is some safety considerations you want to keep in mind with ham radio. As you see the kids with the bow and arrow shooting the wire up in the tree, don't do that around a power line.
Good idea.
Yeah, whenever you're doing anything with your antennas, you want to make sure you're careful with your electrical safety. You want to make sure you're grounded, lightning protection, and if you start dealing with the real powerful radios, you got to worry about RF exposure. You got to track it. So just something to keep in mind. I kind of struggled on where I wanted to put these two slides here about how radio works. I figure I'm just going to do it in the beginning, get it over with, because it makes a lot more sense with what I'm talking about later on. So as far as how these work, it works over radio waves, obviously. The two components of the radio wave, you have the electric portion and the magnetic portion, and it's really fast. Radio goes 300 million meters per second. And you can get quite a long distance if nothing's blocking it. With the radio waves, you're going to have wavelengths and frequencies. If it's bolded, by the way, it is going to be on the test. And by the test, I mean the FCC test. So I did bold some of these right here. But the distance, the radio wave travels in one complete cycle is the wavelength, right? So with a radio wave, you go your peak and your slope. And so that's a wavelength. There's three major frequency ranges used by ham radio operators. You have high frequency, very high frequency, and ultra high frequency. And so they're bolded here because they do ask you on the test what the difference is between the three different radio wavelengths there. And so this is what the radio frequency actually looks like. And you can see here, let's see, actually, let me go back real quick. So with high frequency is where you're going to get ultra long communication. High frequency, you actually can bounce that off of the atmosphere into the ionosphere. And so you can start skipping across the sky with your radio propagation. So that's where you get super long distance. So just because it's like very high frequency and ultra high frequency, that's going to reduce the amount of distance you can travel with your radio wave. But very high frequency and ultra high frequency is very loud, so you can communicate a lot more clear. So you need like a better antenna, you need a more powerful radio to work with the high frequency range, and you can't do like straight voice on some of those ranges too. Like it might only do Morse code, for example. So it'll just pick your wavelengths, but you won't be able to talk on it. But you could talk to China, right? So that's kind of the difference between the three different types of wavelengths. With your frequencies, they're broken up into radio bands. And so if you look like an old AM radio, you're going to start at like the 535 to 1605 kilohertz, and you can tune what station you want on your AM radio. So that's the AM radio band. So for amateurs on the radio, there's actually 26 different types of bands you can communicate with. Each band gives you different frequencies and different ways of communication. For example, some bands you can only do Morse code, other bands you can do, you can stream TV. So it just depends on what frequency you want to use and how far away you want to get, and what type of equipment you have. So it just kind of varies based on that. And so as you can see on the chart, I did break up some of these frequencies right here for you. And you can see like the high frequency stuff here and the ultra low frequencies, the real big bands. Then towards the top, you got the itty bitty bands, and that's really loud. higher up you go. And so with the radio, the part that actually broadcasts the radio wave is your transmitter. The part that receives the radio wave is your receiver. Together, it's a transceiver. So technically, this is a transceiver device because they can both broadcast and receive. With some equipment that actually gets broken up, where you might only have a transceiver, or you might have a piece of equipment that's only your transmitter, and you kind of combine them later on. And so, there's a bit of a difference there. And with that, I see really like three main types of radios you can get. You can get handheld units for portability. You can get vehicle units. And then you can get your actually base station for your ham shack or whatever, just real big, expensive units that you can do a lot with. These three I got up on the screen here, you can kind of see the difference. The one on the far left is the Baofeng UV5R. That's what I have. It's a $25 radio. A couple of you actually have these already. They're 5-watt radios, and they primarily work on the 2-meter and 70-centimeter band. So that gives you like two different bands that you can talk on that are real popular. This vehicle unit here, it's 45 watt versus the 5 watt on this unit. And so you got a lot more wattage, it's a lot more loud, but it's only for a 2-meter band, that unit right there. This unit right here is about $150 on Amazon. Pretty good 2-meter band radio you can get. And this one on the right, it's a $1,200 radio, but you can do, it's 100 watts, so it's double the vehicle power one, and you can do 10-meter band, 6-meter band, 2-meter band, 70-meter band, and I'll go over those next. So it gives you like tons of different options you can communicate with. And so the FCC breaks those bands up. Like I said, there's 26 different types of bands. Here's a couple of different charts on what it looks like. I'm not going to get overly detailed with it, but you can see the different color differentiations. Depending on what band you're on, it will control what you can do with it. For example, like with some bands, you have a CW mode, or SSB mode or FM mode, which I'll go over here next. So it all gets broken down into what you're allowed to do with it, especially with your license level. And then depending on how much of a license you have will also affect what you can do. There's 3 different classes, and I'll explain those later, but depending on how certified you are will control what frequencies you're allowed to broadcast on. And so there's just a lot of different bands out there, so it's a lot of knowledge. Personally, I just like the 2-meter band. It's what my little handheld can do. It's easy. And then the more I learn, the more I want to play with the other frequencies. So any questions on that?
What band is the Citizens band? CB?
CB, that's the 11-meter band.
11 meter.
Yep. And I'll actually be talking about CB radio here in an upcoming slide. So
that's across internationally too, cross country. I mean, everything's the science of it, but there's communication.
Yeah, and with the there's different agreements that the United States have with every country when it comes to broadcasting and communication. So, I mean, obviously, like Mexico's not going to prohibit us from broadcasting if you're in the United States, right? But some countries you're not allowed to talk to. So there's the list, like the banned radio countries you're not actually allowed to do two-way communication with. So I don't know what those are off the top of my head, but that'd be pretty interesting to know. I'm assuming it's the one where we have like the export restrictions on it, and you're not allowed to talk to them essentially. And then if you guys do have any questions, feel free to just yell at me.
Who monitors that? Who's like coming in? Like, who's gonna know if I go on these radios? And all
The
that?
FCC, they're the ones that are in charge of it.
But like, how do they know?
So, and it's interesting to know. So, essentially, what would need to happen for you to get in trouble, right? So,
in real life.
yeah. What it's gonna take, right? So someone's actually gonna have to report it, right? So someone's gonna be like, oh, this person's transmitting, they're not supposed to be transmitting, right? They'll make a report to the FCC, get snitched on, and then the FCC, depending on how big of an issue it is, they'll actually investigate. Funding to the FCC has been drastically cut, so they don't do this as much anymore. But what they could do is they could send a comms van out, and they'll triangulate where you're at based on your transmission. And that's how they'll find you. They can narrow it down, and they'll look for antennas on the side of the buildings. Bigger cities have problems where people will like get into the access shafts of like the skyscrapers, and they'll install illegal radio equipment on top so they can make transmitters so they can talk to each other.
What about like one of these guys
It's going to be tough.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Let's see how much I pay attention to this guy.
Right. So there's different modes you can talk to on the radio. So obviously you guys have heard of like FM and AM modes. FM is the popular with the broadcast radio stations. You'll hear them on the air. That's FM. FM most commonly is used on VHF and UHF. The repeaters that are around town, like we have a repeater at Car Hill Road. There's a ham radio repeater there. It's an FM repeater, and so it'll broadcast on the FM frequency. You also have SSB, which is single sideband. Probably never heard of that before, I'm assuming. Single sideband is, when you have your frequency, it's only broadcasting on one side of the frequency, and so when you see like the electrical graph, it kind of makes sense, but that's why they call it SSB. But it's cool because it has a much narrower bandwidth, and so that means you can. It's really good for voice because it doesn't require a lot of signal to get the signal out, essentially. And so you don't, like with FM, it's loud. You have to be loud with it. With single sideband, you don't have to be very loud, but you have to tune in a lot more finicky, right? You have to really zone in on that signal to be able to hear it. And so single sideband is popular for long distance communication. SSB or single sideband's like where you get into the shortwave radio. That's a SSB signal.
What was CW?
What happened to my mouse? Sorry. Where am I? I know where it is up there. I'm trying to find it on my screen. There it is.
I bet the W stands for wave.
So with CW, CW stands for continuous wave. And so that's where it's just like binary, right? Off, on, off, on. And so that's where you get like Morse code.
Okay.
So that's your CW mode. Now with CW mode, you can get super long range because it doesn't require a whole lot of your signal to transmit. It's just off, on, off, on. You just got to be able to listen to it and broadcast on it. So like which mode you want to use just kind of depends on what you're trying to do and who you're trying to talk to. It's what it boils down to.
FM being frequency modulation, CW being continuous wave. So CW almost like, not quite pulse width modulation, but sort of similar.
Yeah, I mean it's the only reason you use CW is to send Morse code back and forth.
Okay.
So that's the only thing you can do with it. So there's obviously some different radio technology out there. You guys have probably heard of the MURS broadcasting. Someone started broadcasting, which is kind of freaky. You there?
Yeah.
So MURS is what this is licensed by. This is the multi-use radio service. I'm gonna go and turn it off. That's annoying.
That's not me.
It's similar to CB. It's not very powerful, obviously. It's just your little handheld radios. You get like a 2-mile range tops, and I'll go over ranges here in just a second. But that's the MURS. You have CB. Citizens Band Radio, real popular with truckers back in the 80s and 90s. Not so much anymore. It is on the 11-meter band. It does not require a license, neither does the MURS. It's not super good, though. I mean, as Russell and I can probably say, when you're on the trail with your off-road vehicles, it just dies off too quickly to be useful. It does have some cool things you can do with it. I'll talk about it here in a second, but it is what it is. So you have GMRS and FRS. I don't know if you've heard of that. I know Russell's been kind of looking into that a little bit for off-roading. GMRS, it is a licensed radio service you have to get. Once you license it, though, you can talk on it, and you can you can get pretty far on it, which is, I think, up to 25 miles on GMRS. So it's pretty powerful. And then you have FRS. FRS is the family radio service where you can get like one license and it pays for your whole family essentially. And there's no test or anything, you just pay the fee and then your whole family can talk on the license.
What am I doing here? Gosh.
And it's decent. Again, your range isn't going to be as well as like ham radio, for example, but it is, it's a valid option for a lot of people. Then obviously you have shortwave, which I mentioned. Shortwave is on the high frequency bands. You don't need a license for shortwave radio. I mean, I know I was going to have someone come here with an old school shortwave radio to listen to, but it's cool because it's multinational. You can listen to people overseas, so it's pretty cool.
BBC used to broadcast on shortwave.
Mhm.
They still do or not?
I have no idea. I've never listened to a shortwave radio station in my life. Yeah, so
We get like Italy,
yeah.
at least different countries, there was a radio station.
Yeah, it's not as popular anymore, but it's still out there.
Is that also what the radio operators in the military, like Vietnam, used? Is that? shortwave?
Yeah, those are shortwave transmitters. Yeah. As far as with like how far away you can talk, that's called propagation. So every type of radio technology is going to have different propagation, statistics and things you can do with it. To propagate further, you're going to want to get a higher antenna is usually what you want to do. If you have an antenna that's 120 feet up in the air versus 30 feet up in the air, you're going to be 10 times more powerful with how far away you can transmit. So height has a huge thing to do when it comes to how far you can propagate.
This will be kind of powerful because of how high the antenna is.
Yeah, but so imagine if you're talking on that right there,
Yeah.
or versus if you like climb on top of the roof, right?
Well,
Which one's going to give you a better range? It's going to be when you're up on the roof, right?
Yeah.
So the higher the better.
If you're stranded out in the woods, you're trying to communicate, climb
Get up a tree. Exactly.
Back up in the tree stand.
Exactly. Not only does height have a lot to do with it, but obviously your antenna choice is going to have a lot to do with it. And then whether or not it's amplified, because you can amplify your signal and get to the point where someone can hear you, overseas, but there's no way you could listen to them, right? That's over amplified, and that's kind of what shortwave does, right? It's just a really loud signal, but you can't talk back to them. And when it comes to your radio propagation, nighttime's a lot better. Obviously, when you're listening to your AM radio, you have way more AM radio stations you can listen to at night versus the day. I don't know if you ever noticed that, but that's just the way the radio signals propagate. It's the way the sun affects the ionosphere will affect how far away the signal will travel.
Just sun, it's not clouds or nothing.
Nope. And then also the solar cycle, which is what I kind of included here. This is the solar cycle forecast for your sunspots. So when you get a lot of sunspots and a lot of solar activity, it really supercharges our ionosphere, and it causes your radio waves to go way farther. And so for the last 2 years, 3 years, we've been at the bottom of the cycle that they predict. So in the next couple of years, we're supposed to get a lot more solar activity. So now's a good time to start getting into it because you can start getting really long range once the sun kind of heats up and charges our ionosphere, which I thought was crazy, but it's pretty cool. So how far away can you talk? So I have some graphs I'm going to show you here I think is really, really useful. Obviously, there's a lot of factors involved. A lot of tree cover, a lot of hill cover, stuff like that. It's going to really, kill your signal off pretty quickly. I'm going to be showing some of the charts for just a perfect bird's eye view of the different types of radio technologies and type of antenna setups and et cetera. So, but this is the way the graphs will kind of look. You have your distance range probability, and it kind of drops off. So 20 plus miles, 9 miles for this example here. So when it comes to base to base, so like an antenna tower to someone else, here's your different ranges you can see. Obviously, I kind of talked about single sideband communication. You can get a lot further. So the hams, absolutely take it here. And then you have your CB radio, your MERS, your GMRS, and your FRS. That's kind of what you're looking at. And Russell, this is kind of some of the stuff you were asking me, but this is base to base with a 20-foot antenna. See, I'm actually really surprised by CB radio. That can get some decent range if there's nothing blocking it.
Yeah, a lot of it looks like it has to do with like wattage. Like the CBs that we have in our Jeeps and stuff, they're like, I don't know,
5 watt, 10 watt.
10 watt
Yeah.
CBs, so they don't go very far. But you know, some of these trucks, you hear them going down the highway, they got, you know, amplifiers and
4 or 5 pills.
echo boxes and, yeah.
The other thing you can do is base to vehicle, right? Let's say you have an antenna on your vehicle, and then you have your transmit tower. You can kind of see how it changes a little bit here. You get a lot better. Again, the ham HF SSB range just blows it out of the water. You can kind of see how everything just drops down drastically. Like your FRS is only like a mile. Your CB radio drops down to like 15 miles tops.
And the FRS, it is limited, you cannot transmit on FRS above half watt.
Yeah, it's super low power. Yeah. And then you have vehicle to vehicle. You can kind of see the range differences here. And this is where, the CB AM 5 watt, 4 miles is really like perfect on a flat road. You start getting around trees and stuff, it just drops off. We have pedestrian to vehicle. So this is kind of interesting. They're talking here with actually ham radio packs that you can take out with you with like a power supply, like a battery, throw it up in the tree, for example, and then how far away you can talk. But you can still get very impressive range even though you're just a pedestrian. And then pedestrian to pedestrian, that's kind of where your ranges are at with just portable packs. So you can kind of see the difference. I thought that was pretty interesting metrics there.
I was gonna say, we've had that experience here.
Mm-hmm.
Get off the repeated channels and it takes.
It dies.
Half mile maybe.
So I did say you can amplify your signal. Here's kind of what one of those amplifiers look at. The main reason you want to install an amplifier is just to really, boost your output signal. Start talking to people really far away. But again, you have to worry about them being able to broadcast back to you, so you have to adjust your antennas. You can over-amplify. They're pretty expensive. A lot of times you're better off just installing a tower or getting your signal up in a tree or something versus an amplifier. But they are available.
Would you hardwire into that, or does it?
Yep.
Remotely? Okay.
Yep, hardwired. So antennas. You can see I got a couple of different antennas going on here. The antenna that's on here, this is called a rubber duck antenna. Most of your basic radios are going to have these. They're okay, but they're not very okay, right? You don't get a very good signal on these. You have J-pole antennas. They're roll up. A lot of the guys with the tactical radio packs, they'll have these roll up J-pole antennas, and they're real popular for emergency communications. Just kind of run it up a tree or something. That's where you start getting your radio communications on a roll up J-pole antenna here.
And then that's all about height, or just the length of the.
Yeah, height and length. Now, when you make your antenna way too long, it's going to affect what frequencies you can send and receive at. So that's something to keep in mind. So right now, I have this at, I can't remember if it's 23 centimeters, but I have this measured for the 2 meter band because that's what I want to use. Now, I could way hyperextend this. And when I do that, that's going to lower what frequencies I can use to the 6 meter band or even lower than that, like the lower frequencies. And when I make it shorter, that's when I can start talking to satellites. And so even though my antenna might only be like 9 inches, that's the perfect length to talk to the NOAA weather satellites when they pass. So again, the biggest thing is just going to be your height, right?
But it's height of where it's mounted and it's the actual length of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, to set up
to get your best communication.
any wave of whatever frequency band you want.
Yeah, and it's whatever frequency you want to get. It's going to affect what antenna you use. So those were good, like handheld ones. Now, I talked about in your vehicle. This is what a vehicle antenna might look like. Slap it on the top of your truck. It kind of looks like the CB radios will have these on top of their vehicles. Depending on how high it is, it's going to affect what you can receive. A pretty basic mobile antenna there. Here's what a base station antenna might look like. This is called a J-pole antenna. These are good. They're omnidirectional, so it'll go all different directions when you receive on this. This is a 2-meter band J-pole antenna. So depending on what band you want to do, it'll be how long your different pieces are. But this is what you'd run up on top of a pole or something. I think if you go by Columbus Township, they have a J-pole mounted on top of their roof, and this is what it looks like. These are really easy to DIY, build yourself. I mean, it's just 3 pieces of metal. Just gotta make sure they're measured out right, and then you have a soldered on connector. So they're not too difficult to make. Actually, none of these antennas are very difficult to make. There's DIY plans for almost all of this. Here's a ground plane antenna. Ground plane antennas are real popular. They're very effective. You can get quite a few different, you kind of see they're just like little tripod antennas essentially, and you run that up a pole and you can get quite a few different frequencies. So again, this is like 19.25 inches for the 2-meter band. So this is, it's pretty easy to build, and they're pretty popular. The Yagi antennas, this is what you need, Keenan.
To get up out of the valley.
Get out of the valley.
You
These
can
are,
have one of those on the house to pick up radios.
yeah, it looks like the old school TV antennas. The Yagi antenna, they're directional, so you're going to want to point it at whatever you're trying to broadcast to and from. It's like I know with Grandma's TV antenna, you could rotate it, right, to get the Yagi antenna to go to a certain direction. So that's what they're useful for. They're pretty powerful, but yeah, if you're out in the sticks, this is what you need.
Remember here, Dad cusses about not being able to see Dan Rather, have to get
Yep.
on the road to get on frozen.
Got one of those in my attic right now.
Yep. And the old school TV antennas probably won't work for ham radio. So just kind of keep in mind, because it's different frequencies those things were designed to pick up. It's all about the math of like how the antenna length are, but Yagi antennas you can buy and you can build yourself, but since there's so many connectors, it's a lot easier probably to buy one.
Will the old TV antenna work for that?
Probably not. Yeah.
Modified or-
Yeah, you could modify them maybe, but I could definitely see a modification on it. Just cut them to length. Just have to figure out, what to cut on them.
Right on.
This is a dipole antenna. It's just another option. Again, it just depends on what your length is on these 2 different poles, but this is real popular to put. For example, if you're an HOA and they won't let you put up an antenna, but they'll let you put up a flagpole, this is what you would install on the flagpole, and they would know the difference. So it's a dipole antenna. You can also throw it in your window or like on your wall. That's what these are also used for. So as far as getting licensed, the licenses are good for 10 years. I think it cost me $35 to get licensed. There's 3 different types of licenses. There's the technician level, the general level, and the extra level, and I'll talk about in the next slide. You got to register with the FCC before you do anything. They'll give you an FRN number. It's your federal registration number that you'll need in order to take your test. After you pass the test, you wait a day or 2, and they'll give you your call sign, which, to be honest, was like 60% of why I wanted to do this was to get my call sign. Right, my call sign's KD9RWK. I think it's way too cool. What's that? No, well, actually, you can. That's called a vanity call sign, and so you can pick up vanity call signs. Absolutely.
So it's like a license plate.
Yeah, it's kind of like a license plate.
Better luck with these guys.
Typically they're going to be, 1 letter, 1 number, and then 3 letters is typically what the call signs look at, right? So example, mine's a little bit longer. Mine's KD9RWK. I think they went from 5 character to 6 character because there's just so many operators out there. But that's what it looks like.
Can I have a handle that's different than my call sign, like if I want to be Rubber Ducky?
Yeah, you just got to call it KD9RWK. This is Rubber Ducky, right? Absolutely. Also, with getting licensed, all of these test questions are online. They're available to view, like what the test pool is. It's not like a hidden test pool. You got to study a book and just hope you get the right answers. No, they'll tell you what the questions and answers are. So half of it's just memorization.
So, as people come and go in our world, and their licenses expire,
You get 1 year to renew.
I meant the like, I have it and then I pass away, like.
Yeah, so you can apply for those old vanity. That would be a vanity license at that point. So my grandpa didn't have one, but I know a lot of farmers used to have their ham radio handles, which were the license they get to communicate. And I think I found like an uncle or something that had a call sign, so I could apply for a vanity license and get my uncle's old call sign. But yeah, I mean they will recycle them after a while.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you could just like retire it.
No, I can't retire it. Not like Michael Jordan's jersey. With the tests, kind of give you an idea of what those look like. Again, there's 35 questions on the level 1 technician test. You have to get 74% right to pass. There's 428 questions in the question pool to pick from. And there will be 3 electrical schematic diagrams you have to figure out. So they'll show you like a electrical diagram, and they'll be like, what is the transceiver? And they'll pick out like 4 different electrical components and be like, oh, it's that, right? That was super easy. It's just memorize a couple of symbols and know what they mean. But then you do have, again, with your technician class, it's going to give you access to a lot of different frequencies. The general class, though, that's when you can start talking overseas a lot better. The more high frequency bands, that's when you want to get your general license for it. And then your extra license is when you could really do some damage. Each license class will up what wattage you're allowed to transmit on. And so you're not allowed to, broadcast a super loud signal if you don't know what you're doing, essentially. Because again, you can electrocute yourself if you're not doing it right. So, like, put up a giant antenna and not ground it, yeah, you're gonna get shocked real bad. And so they kind of want you to know what you're doing. Also, like when you're hooking up generators or solar power, there's quite a few different questions like that on the extra exam. But yeah, any questions on that? So that's how to get licensed on that. Now I'm going to kind of go over some of the operating procedures real quick with you guys. So whenever you are on your ham radio, you have to transmit your call sign every 10 minutes. The repeaters around here will transmit their call sign every 10 minutes. And so that's why if you're tuned in the right signal, you can actually hear the ham radio repeaters every 10 minutes and what their call sign is. Typically, they'll do the call sign in Morse code. I think the one that's in Seymour will do it in plain English. But when you're broadcasting, it's encouraged. And again, if it's bolded, it's on the test, right? SSC encourages you to use the phonetic alphabet, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, while you're on the air. It makes it easier to communicate with each other. You do have to use English. You're not allowed to use any other language on ham radio per the FCC. No profanity, and no broadcasting. Broadcasting, you pick up the radio and be like, hey, what's up, guys? I just wanted to check in with y'all, right? That's just a broadcast. So it's not to like one person in particular. You want to broadcast to just a ton of people. You're not allowed to do that on ham radio, except if it's an emergency. Broadcasting's allowed. If, for example, there's tornado or severe weather, you can shout on the radio and give everyone a heads up, even if there's a danger to life or property.
So you're saying it has to be like directed at a receiver?
Yep.
A specific person?
Now, there is radio clubs we'll check over here in a little bit. We'll have net control operations, so you can actually check into a net. A net will be formed, and then you can talk to each other, and you'll have a controller that kind of controls all that. I'll go over that here in a little bit, but that is the only exception. It's kind of broadcasting, but not really, is how they kind of get around that.
Kind of analogous to spam and emails now.
Yeah.
So who maintains those repeaters?
Every repeater is licensed, and there is a license control operator for each repeater. So any complaints they'd have to deal with it. And you can look up all those repeater call signs on the internet, and I'll actually go over some of the local repeaters here in a second. Couple different types of communication I want to go over. So you have simplex. Again, if it's bolded, it's on the test. Memorize it, right? Simplex communication, it's just when you're talking to 2 different people on the radio, simplex communications, radio to radio. You won't have a repeater when you're on simplex. There is a national calling frequency for simplex communication. It is the 146.520 megahertz. You'll actually see a lot of ham operators on the road will have that sticker on their vehicle. And that means they're like, hey, I'm on this band. If you guys want to talk, just hit me up on the radio, right? And so that's what that is if you ever see that number. There is something that's called band plans. So even though there's 26 bands for us to use on the ham radio. When it comes to those bands, there might be a band plan for each one of those bands, and those are like a voluntary guide to make sure like the different radio clubs aren't interfering with each other. Might not be a huge deal here, but when you're out in California and they have like 500 repeaters, right? It gets crowded quick on the air, and so that's what the band plan is they kind of coordinate all that. And actually, looking up the repeater bands in California is super cool because you can see them all listed, where they're at geographically, and I mean they'll use those for fire response whenever there's wildfires. If you're going to call another station, catch you later, Matt. It's lovely to see you. I'll get you the PowerPoint. If you're going to call another station, pretty much you just say their call sign with your call sign right afterwards. Be like, hey, K14A, this is K89, RWK. So that's how you communicate. You'd identify the transmitting station, and then you give your station information. If you want to talk to anyone, right, so if you're just looking to make contact with someone, you would call out CQ. CQ means you're calling any station, since, is there anyone out there who wants to start a conversation? So CQ, you're allowed to broadcast hey, does anyone want to talk? And if someone responds to you, they'll say your call sign and their call sign, and then you can start a conversation. And so typically you'd say CQ 3 times. This is what I do when I get on the radio. I'm like, CQ, CQ, CQ. This is K89 RWK looking to make contact. And if someone's out there, they'll talk back to you. And so that would be a logged contact, right? Because that's where you go into your logbook. A lot of ham operators will have a logbook that has the dates, times, and who they made contact with. It's not required or anything. It's just kind of a cool thing to do. Once you make a confirmed log with someone out there, a lot of operators will exchange something called a QSL card. QSL card, when you get their call sign, you can look up their call sign in the FCC database, right? When you look up my call sign, you'll see Josh Burbrink. It'll show my address. So a lot of ham radio operators, what they'll do is once they make contact with people, they'll look up the call sign, they'll write a little QSL postcard, and be like, hey, thanks for making contact with me, and they'll mail them out. And they're collectible. A lot of people will collect those as well. So it's just kind of a cool thing you can do with it. It's like a postcard. It's quaint. Something else that I lost my stupid mouse again. There it is. Something else people do. It's called a radiogram. Radiogram's a formal written message transmitted by radio, and so you'll have operators that will try to relay your message as far as they can by any means possible. And so if they can't reach you on the radio, they'll call you, or they'll send you they'll send you a letter, whatever it takes to get the radiogram to you. Typically, it's done over the radio or over the phone. I actually got a radiogram. Whenever a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll monitor the SEC database for brand new registrations, and they'll just send a radiogram out to anyone that's new. They're like, hey, welcome to the club, right? And so, Russell, you want to pass this around? That's my first radiogram. I thought it was kind of cool. They tried to reach me on the radio, and then they end up calling me. And then I spoke to the guy on the phone, and since it's a formal written message, the people that you talk to have to relay the exact message that they were heard with the relay. So it's a way of formal communication. Radiograms kind of started with the military. Radio communication, formal radio communication in the military was the first usage for radiogram, and that's kind of where that comes from.
So repeater will bounce your signal to multiple.
That's the next slide. That's the next slide, Keenan. That's the next slide.
Relay is actually asking somebody to repeat.
Yeah. Yeah, formal relay communication. So it's like, hey, I'm going to tell you a message. I want you to tell someone else the same message.
So would you find out if the message gets changed?
So with radiograms, people take very, very careful to make sure that doesn't happen. They don't want to game a telephone. So let's talk repeaters. I brought it up a couple times. Again, if it's bold, it's going to be on the test. So a repeater station will receive your message and then retransmit the message. And they're way up high, and so you can talk a lot further when you use a repeater.
And that's instantaneous?
Yeah, instantaneous. They'll typically use VHF and UHF frequencies. And this is what most new hams will use the first time to make contact. They'll wait for the weekly like club. This is what I did. My first contact was when I waited for the weekly transmission where all the ham guys get together on the radio, and they, you just give the guys your call sign and they'll talk to you on the radio. And that's what I did to kind of get started. But that's a repeater station. Now, because a repeater station broadcasts and receives at the exact same time, they have to use two different frequencies, or else you're going to loop it, right? It's going to cause a feedback loop. And so with the repeaters on my station, to listen to it, it'll be on one frequency, and when I do my push to talk, it'll transmit on a different frequency. And that way it doesn't cause that loop. And I'll show that in this next slide. And so what a lot of people do just to cut down on the amount of interference they might get with those repeaters, they'll have like a special code called a CTCSS. And it's a subaudible tone. You won't really be able to hear it. And it's the key that unlocks the repeater to let you transmit on it. And so you'll be able to listen to the repeater without this code, but to actually talk to the repeater, it'll require this code for you to broadcast. And you can see here with this example, the input is 449.250, and the output's 444.250. And so it makes a little bit more sense when you actually see on the radio. You'll see the frequency, and when you push to talk, your frequency will change instantly, and then you're talking. And then when you're done, you click back, it'll go back to your receive frequency. And that's kind of how that works. I mentioned like the weekly nets the guys will put on with the radio. So that's your nets are your on-the-call gathering of operators. And most clubs and groups will meet on a semi-regular schedule and just talk on the radio, check their gear, make sure everything's working. Traffic on a net operations, the formal message is exchanged by net stations. So that's when you get your radiograms. That would be a formal traffic where they'd rebroadcast that information. And then when you check in, it's kind of interesting to listen to, but they essentially have a net control operator. He'll sit there and be like, hey, this is net control. Is this, he'll first make sure there's no formal traffic. He'll check to make sure there's no emergency traffic. He'll make sure that the line is clear. If the line's clear, he'll introduce himself, and then he will ask for anyone who wants to check in to go ahead and check in. And when you check in, you'd be like, net control, this is KD9 RWK checking in. And then you can either say short time, or you can do a regular check-in. They'll do short time check-ins first, and then regular check-ins after that. Short time is just like you're just pretty much doing a radio check, and that's all. Like they'll log you that you checked in for the meeting, and then you're not going to say anything after that. And then they'll do regular check-ins, and so after everyone checks in and they make sure, then he'll call you out one by one, like KD9 RWK, what's your traffic? And be like, hey guys, got a new radio. Thanks. That could be it, right? A lot of guys will just talk about their day or what's been going on that week. It's a bunch of old fogies, really, half the time, but it's kind of interesting to listen to. Yeah, you'd fit right in, Jim.
Old fogey,
Yep. But the net control operator kind of operates all that. So here's the local repeaters around here. I'll get you a copy of this. You don't have to write it down if you don't want. But you see there's quite a few different local repeaters. You can send this list here. I didn't include anything from Indianapolis, but there's tons of them up there, like tons of repeaters up there. The Columbus net's the one that I check in. That's the only one I can really receive, along with the Bartholomew County Aries net. So not only do we have a net, but we have Aries, and I'll go over Aries here next, but that's the emergency communication. And you can see the schedule here. On Tuesdays, they do the regular, net, and then on Wednesdays, they do the emergency check-ins, and then have a couple other counties. I'm not able to reach Brown County from where I'm at with my setup, but I don't have a very good antenna. But I know when I listened to the net last week, there was a guy from Bean Blossom. Yeah, Bean Blossom checking into our Columbus net, which that is a serious antenna he has to be able to, and he sounded crystal clear. It was awesome. So it's kind of cool to hear. And then you'll get people from like Seymour and stuff checking in on our repeater because they have a clear line of sight. I have a lot of problems since I'm right next to this huge hill, and so it really blocks my entire like southern hemisphere to be able to check in anything.
So that's why they're all at night because it's easy.
Yep. Better propagation at night always. And yeah, I think that's the only reason they do it. Other than that, people are just available in the evening to check in. So,
So what's the number afterwards? What's the last three points?
right. So that's the CT CSS code I mentioned. So that's the code to unlock the repeater. And you got to program that into your radio. It's kind of a pain to do it manually, but that's why I have this Chirp software. The Chirp software, I can just sit there and program it all on my computer and then blast it to my radio, and it programs my radio. And I'm happy to do that for all of you. Once you get your radio, I have like some 70 channels pre-programmed. It takes me 30 seconds to program your radio, and then all of our radios would be the same. So it's kind of nice. There's also a few other local frequencies that you might find interesting. So 15431 is the Bartholomew County Fire Dispatch. You'll be able to hear any of the dispatch tones go out on that. It's real similar to our pagers. Our pagers tune into that exact same frequency. All you can hear is dispatch. You won't be able to hear anyone replying to dispatch, but you can hear them. So when a call gets out, you can hear all the information. You also have Brown County Fire 154.062. And I included their station call signs there is what the letters are. And you also have like the NOAA stations, which are kind of you get your emergency weather from. There's tons of other frequencies out there. I put 2 links there, Repeater Book and radioreference.com. You can look up the area. Like when we went off-roading, I looked up the county we were in, and I was able to pull all of the different frequencies in that county that we were going to be off-roading in. So if there was an emergency, I could get someone on the radio, because there's no cell phone signal in half those areas. And yeah, it'll just list them all. There's also some other cool, like with Brown County, I know you can listen to Brown County State Park because they use standard radios. I think REMC has normal business radios they use you can listen into. It just kind of depends where you're at, what you can pick up out there. And all that's on that website. And then yeah, up in Indy, you can get tons of really cool places. The last thing I haven't talked about that you can pick up real easy locally would be satellites. So where the repeater where we're at, it might be a few miles away. How much of a distance is to get up to the satellite above us? It's not very far, right? I mean, realistically, it's only a couple miles tops, maybe a few more.
Like 100 miles? The space?
I honestly have no idea how far up the satellites are. I have no concept of space like that. But
15,000? No, it's more than that.
I was gonna say, to get into space, the Kármán line is 62 miles.
okay, so it's further than what I thought, but it's direct line of sight, right? There's nothing blocking you, and so it's real easy to talk to satellites.
Who can
Now-
identify the satellite that's in that photograph?
Yeah, so everyone should be able to identify the one on the left. Bonus if you know what the one on the right is.
Sputnik on the left.
Sputnik on the left. So let's listen to Sputnik. Sputnik had a signal that scared the crap out of our grandparents. That's what Sputnik sounded like. You could tune in your shortwave radio and listen to Sputnik when it passed by. It only broadcasted for 21 days until the battery died. This is what started the arms race to get in space. So
Made it around the Earth one whole time in that 21 hours, you think?
I don't know how. I mean, it was up there for a while until it burned up, but the battery itself only lasted 21 days.
Didn't have solar cells yet.
Nope.
I can see why it scared the crap out of your grandparents.
Yeah.
Very slow beeping, and that would kind of scare me.
Sounds like a countdown.
Right. The detonation.
Now, the one on the right is the SO50 satellite, which I guess it's cheating since it's right there. So the SO50 satellite is a Saudi satellite that has a repeater built into it. So when you transmit to it, you transmit to on one frequency, and then it'll repeat your signal wherever to anyone else within range on a different frequency. And so with that, you can talk to people several states away real easily when that satellite passes.
We just don't have enough of those up there that we can.
Constantly, no. Yeah. And so this video is pretty cool. This is with just a standard Bofang radio, and he makes contact several states away. I guess I'll have to watch this on YouTube. Or I can just crash out it all. I'll just hit play.
This is Kilo Kilo 4. 4 Mike November Delta. David in Clearwater, Florida. Getting ready to see if I can make a contact on the Saudi set. Getting ready to pass over here. And actually it's coming over now.
So he's just tracking it. That way he knows where to point his radio at, because you want to point it at the satellite.
To track the satellite. And I have a little Baofeng UV5R. And I have programs of
So even though you're out in the middle of nowhere, you can do this, Keenan.
DL tones. And I just stepped through from 90, 91, 92, all the way to
Yeah, and because of the Doppler shift, you actually have to change what channel you're on constantly with talking to the satellites. And so there'll be like a bank of like 9 channels you want to pre-program, and you'll talk. And as soon as it starts getting fuzzy, you'll switch to the next channel. That's just how fast that satellite's going through the sky. This guy's talking to Cuba from Illinois. That's pretty cool.
It's hard to hear, but it's pretty cool.
Echo Lima 92, Kilo 4 Mike November Delta.
And so for it to be a full contact, right, you have to say his call sign and get a reply, and then you can log it.
That is cool.
And then the other popular satellite, obviously, is the not really a satellite, but it's the International Space Station. So, and I'll go over AMSAT, which is an organization that specializes in satellite communication. Get a lot of resources on it. But one thing AMSAT's big about is trying to get kids to talk to the astronauts through ham radio, right? So it's a good way to get them into it if you can make contact like that. To be honest, though, it's real difficult for, I guess, normal non-scheduled events for people to make contact up there, because the astronauts are pretty busy, and they're only going to be flying over you a certain amount of time. So for that window to line up, it's difficult. But I think every single astronaut we have in the ISS right now is a ham radio operator licensed. So
This is something I should be telling my science teacher, so we can talk to astronauts.
you should talk to the astronauts. It'd be cool. Obviously, the astronauts have contacted thousands of ham radio operators around the world. It's kind of like the dream, though, right? So you got to be real lucky, but it does happen. I actually have an app on my phone that'll alert me every time the ISS flies by, just in case I want to go outside and try to point my radio. But of course, it's always at like 6:30 in the morning right now, and I'm not getting up. So, and there's also a transmitter on the ISS that's not part of the ham radio relay they have, and I'll go over that here in a little bit. But they will occasionally transmit different frequencies that are non-voice, and I'll talk about it here in a second. It's pretty cool what you can do with that. So the last normal communication that's really spooky that I super think's interesting, really interesting. Anyone heard of a number station before? Number stations are cool. Let's play this little video so you guys can hear this. Don't get scared. Put this on, my wife was freaked out. She made me turn it off. This is a number station. Different numbers. So what they are is they're shortwave transmissions from foreign intelligence agencies to spies in the field. That's what it is.
They have a decoder book or something?
Yeah, they have a decoder. But it's almost impossible to decode it without knowing, where they're starting, what the decoder is. So,
So if it repeats, they probably just have a sequence of numbers that indicates the beginning of the message?
yeah. And there could be just a lot of junk messages, but one junk message on every other Tuesday. It's almost impossible to decode. People try. You can get real crazy about it if you want to.
There's a couple that have been running for decades, right?
Yeah, decades.
It has not changed for decades.
Let's see if I can't pull that link up. So here is this website that lists them all.
And that's technology still in use in intelligence agencies?
Yep. Military frequencies too. So, they are legitimate. You can see here, though, if it's on this list, it's active. So these are all active number stations you can pick up. And that list goes down. I just don't know where the mouse is. But there's hundreds of them out there. Depending on where you're at, you'd be able to pick it up. But yeah, I mean, they're interesting because they provide, anyone with a radio can pick it up, right, from almost anywhere in the world. And so it's instant, long-distance encrypted communication.
And that's shortwave?
Shortwave. Yep, and you can pick it up with your ham. Hey, Jared.
There we go.
We were just talking about number stations. Do you know what a number station is?
Negative.
Let me play that video one more time because I just think it's the coolest thing. So, Jared, they're foreign intelligence agencies talking to spies over shortwave radio through encrypted communications through random number generators. So there's actually hours of YouTube video available. It actually puts me right to sleep. Let's find my mouse here. So there's a number of different local groups that are involved with amateur radio. You have the Columbus Amateur Radio Club, which I've met up with them once to get my license, essentially take my test. They have a website, and they meet physically monthly, so you can go and talk to the guys, and that's where you would actually take your test at, is with the Columbus Amateur Radio Club. I think they meet at St. Peter's or Columbus Township Fire. So that's where I went to Columbus Township Fire, but then on their website they say they meet at St. Peter's. So I don't know which it is. I'd probably have to email and coordinate. You also have the South Central Indiana Communications Support Group. They have a website. Brown County Amateur Radio, Bloomington Radio, and anyone with 3 members can form their own club. So we could form our own radio club. We actually would get our own call sign, our club call sign, which I think is pretty cool. So any of these groups have lots of local people you can talk to and communicate with them and get some help. So obviously, I don't know everything. I kind of barely know what I'm doing over here, but I know a decent amount. So
What are pilots and air traffic controllers using? Is that the same stuff?
they use their own trunked radio, and so it's similar to like what the fire department here uses, where instead of it's digital radio essentially, and so it's not within the normal range of frequencies you can decode. It's all encrypted.
No way we're gonna walk on that.
Yeah, it's difficult. Now, one thing I would like to do, I was talking to my boss. He's a pilot, and I've heard what you can do is take your ham radio up on an airplane, go up as high as you can with the airplane, and you can start talking to people really far away, right? So I thought that'd be really fun to hop on a Cessna and talk to faraway contacts. I think that'd be cool.
You can't just get on Delta with your thing.
No.
Really pissy about that.
Yeah, they get upset.
Like, I can't, like, work with friends, I'm sure.
So I'm going to go over a couple of the different organizations to be aware of other than these local groups. So obviously you have the SCC, right? They're the ones in charge. On the test, if they ask you, the SCC's purpose is advancing skills in the technical and communication phases of the radio art. All right, that's on the test. That was actually one of my test questions. But yeah, they're in charge when it comes to anything. They're the one you have to report to in the United States. Now, you also have the National Association for Amateur Radio, which I'm a member. There's my lovely member card there. They were founded in 1914. They are real big on just training, getting people trained in the radio, providing resources. They have tons of how-to articles on their website, how to register for your exam. I mean, their website is fantastic. There's so much material on there. Highly recommend going there. It's arrl.org. You don't have to be licensed to be a member. Then anyone's welcome to join the group. I also briefly touch base on AMSAT, right? They are the organization that's in charge for amateur radio in space. They've been around for about 50 years, ever since we've been to space, right? Makes sense. Again, they're real big on their ARIS program, which is amateur radio on the International Space Station. Try to get students involved. And their website has a bunch of information on satellites, right? So not only can you talk to, obviously, the ones that I listed, but there are hundreds of satellites up there. Some of them are only half working, but you can listen to them when they're working. And you might not be able to like understand anything that's going on, but you could record it, you know, and be like, hey, I was able to listen to the satellite, which I thought was kind of cool. And I'll go over like one or two other satellites thing here in a little bit, but yeah, AMSAT's the group that's in charge of that.
Were they the ones that launched? There's a HamSat, which is like a ham radio satellite repeater that someone in the U.S. launched.
But yeah, and AMSAT would have all that information. They're probably the one that organized it as well. And they're real big into that. So I guess the next part I want to touch base and what really got me into ham radio is emergency communications. You know, it's great for disaster response because you don't need to be on the grid for it, right? You can talk to, you know, anyone, anywhere within range if you have the gear. You don't need the internet. You don't need cell phones. You don't need satellites. All you need is your radio. Not many of you know this, but a few months ago, there was actually a cyber attack, and it took down 40% of all of our voice over IP calls in the United States. Microsoft was affected, Zoom was affected, Google was impacted. Like tons of people were impacted by that, and it was a big thing, and it lasted for days. You know, that's just a smaller cyber attack, right? You have something larger, take down our grid. You know, ham radio would be the only way to really talk to each other long distance. You know, so what do ham operators do during and after disasters? So what they'll do is they'll be organized, and they'll work with government and emergency officials to provide communications in the event of a disaster. Many national organizations have formal agreements with the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, which we'll talk about next, including FEMA, National Communications System, Salvation Army, Department of Homeland Security, National Weather Service, etc. There's actually annual field days they'll put on to help with that type of training, provide these ham operators with a scenario that they have to communicate with the different, you know, government organizations, be able to coordinate and provide support. One recent example there, a few recent examples of this where they were called in was obviously 9/11, the World Trade Center attack, the 2003 North American blackout. There was also Hurricane Katrina, and then with the Hurricane Maria when it hit Puerto Rico, they called in ham operators as well. By far, though, Hurricane Katrina, I guess, is like the best example of ham radio with disaster preparedness. The entire cluster of things that went wrong with that. All of the congressional hearings had nothing but good things to say about the ham radio operators, and they actually called in over 1,000 ham radio operators to provide communications during that.
From around the country?
Yep. So I'm going to play just these two videos real quick. Or is it one video? It might just be one video. If I can find my mouse again, I hate this. There it is.
Scenes of destruction throughout the central U.S., the massive tornado ripping up Jefferson City, Missouri. And with all that devastation, more than 1,000 miles away here in Newington, amateur radio operators are on the ready. Today, they were training for a hurricane scenario.
Those operators were testing their ability to relay massive amounts of messages during and after a disaster. Fox 61's Jim Altman has more.
This is more than just radio chatter. Days before the official start of hurricane season, the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL, needs to be on their A game.
Kilo Bravo 3, Mike X-Ray Mike, this is WNEW calling on frequency.
What's happening in Newington is a full-scale demo to prepare for a disaster.
What essentially has happened is a large hurricane has hit the eastern seaboard, and we're receiving messages from stations up and down the eastern seaboard.
The drill is in coordination with the Red Cross and FEMA, who happen to be in Baltimore. But from Newington, they act as a sort of critical message clearinghouse.
Think of it, the power's out, cell towers are down, but their message here in Newington is they can carry on the message because we don't rely on the infrastructure. Roger, Roger?
Joe Karsha is the ARRL station manager.
We will get on the air with emergency power sources. So if the grid is down, if cell technology is down, we can still communicate over RF or radio frequencies using very simple stations, or rather complex stations as I have here.
Amateur radio works. Amateur radio works. When something happens, we're called up, and our guys in the field hit the field, and they come to action.
Where is help needed most? Where should relief workers rush to? All part of the mocked-up scenarios with real-life implications.
This kind of training is crucial to make sure that when the disaster hits, we can respond in a timely fashion to support the American public.
Kilo Charlie 3, Echo Whiskey Yankee. And we're all proud of our call signs and the abilities that we have to serve the public. And that's what we're here for.
In Newington, Jim Altman.
Roger, thanks for the relay.
Roger.
61 News.
That was my favorite part.
To make a satellite work at my house, would I have to connect my transmitter to it, or does it just have to be close by?
You can just talk to this.
Talk with that, and it'll go to my. So if I have a hill right next to my house,
In the backyard.
on top of the hill, so I use the hill.
Well, you can do it anywhere, because you're just pointing up, right?
Right.
So it just depends where you're transmitting at. So obviously, with it comes to using a radio for emergency preparedness, you have to have a plan, you got to prepare for it, and you got to practice, right? So that's a large part of me going through this a lot, trying to figure out what I'm doing, because you don't want to wait till an emergency to be able to learn how to do half this, right? So, so a few different things out there. So Skywarn. Skywarn's a big one. That's part of the National Weather Service. It's the trained weather spotters, right? We'll have like yearly storm spotter classes you can go to and learn how to spot different hazards of a major thunderstorm or tornadoes coming through. With Skywarn, which I thought was the coolest thing that's happened. A couple weeks ago, we had that bad storm go through, and we had the. I should probably talk about this, right? Yeah. So with Skywarn, with the severe weather we had a few weeks ago, where the tornadoes ripped through Kentucky and then up north, Skywarn actually hopped on our local repeater here, the National Weather Service, and they were accepting call-ins from ham radio operators for severe weather. And so they were asking for anyone that had seen hail or severe winds to go and check in. And when the storm was going through, they were sitting there listening to our frequency until the storm passed, and then they left. So I thought that was pretty interesting that we had, the National Weather Service on our local repeater listening to it. And so there's a little video here on storm spotting. And with storm spotting, ham radio operators are where they get a majority of their information because it's so quick and it doesn't require the grid.
Back when I was young and relatively healthy, I was, out chasing storms.
But because of health problems, Jim is confined mostly to just his bed. But he doesn't let that deter him from playing an avid role in covering the Ozarks weather.
Yeah, I'm pretty much dedicated into watching the weather. This is where I can protect the public is right here. I don't have to be out anywhere.
With two computers at his fingertips, accessing Doppler radar and the all-important amateur radio, Jim helps coordinate and disseminate weather information to many sources, like the National Weather Service.
I basically control the amateur radio side of it and act as a clearing point for the information, talk via radio, providing them the ground truth reports.
But Jim also is in direct connection with a group of storm spotters called Skywarn. One of those is Jeff Morrissey.
It's a way for us to enjoy our interest and then give back to the community. The protection of life and property is really the goal, and helping the National Weather Service issue warnings so media groups such as KSPR can get the word out to people, and hopefully results in less injuries and lives saved.
When things get bad, Jeff is out in the elements, tracking severe storms, using his mobile chase vehicle equipped with all the latest gadgets. But one is more important to him than the others.
If I didn't have anything else, I could do this with the amateur radio.
Up to the size of quarters and thunderstorm winds to 60 miles per hour and isolated tornadoes possible. Also like tonight,
Thanks, Jim. Copy direct. KB 0 with techno clear. It's what gets me my information to safely position me in a storm and what allows me to relay back the information about the storm.
But with all of the technology like Doppler radar, why do we need people like Jeff to actually go out in the storm?
Radar just can't see it sometimes, and I think it's very important. And spotters can report what's going on at the base of the storm, the wall cloud funnel, whatever, a tornado on the ground, whatever it is.
You could build the best radar network in the world, mini Dopplers, phased array radar. You're still gonna have to have ground truth observations.
So we asked Jeff, what's the worst weather you've been in while spotting?
Actually, January 8th, the overnight event back in 2008, getting caught in 90-mile-an-hour winds in the car was pretty crazy.
Which brings us to our next point. It can be dangerous.
The most important thing to understand is this is not a game. It's not something that you should just go out and do just because you're interested in it. Training and safety is key.
Well, a hard job with work hazards, that has to be a good paycheck, right?
Jim, tell me how much you get paid to do this.
So, Skywarn the training is available online. For the last couple of years they've not been doing it with COVID, but you can go on there and get certified. I'm a certified storm spotter, and by certified storm spotter, it means you've watched the video. There's no test, so. But yeah, I mean, with ham radio though, that's something you can do with it. It's Skywarn, so I thought that was pretty interesting. FEMA is also a great resource for emergency preparedness. With a lot of these emergency courses with ham radio, they do require you to have your basic FEMA certifications, incident command system, and your NIMS, the national, I'm gonna flake that, National Incident Management System. Yes, got it. And so if you just go to FEMA and you can get those 2 certifications, they're free. They'll step you through everything. It is required for the next course I'm going to talk about through FEMA, but they do have some really good information there. I mean, obviously they're in charge of emergency management in the United States, so hopefully they know what they're doing, right? So.
Well, they think they do.
So with the ARL, which I talked about already, they also have some classes that they will put on that you can get certified with. They actually have several. The big one they offer is their ECL1 course, which is the Introduction to Emergency Communication. And so with the ARL, they'll have their ARES, which is the Amateur Radio Emergency Service. They require you to have the certification to help. That way you just know what you're doing. And so it is what I'm going to start training for. I think it's just a basic level 1 course. It's free. But they do have some really good training on that website. But yeah, I've talked about it a few times. So this is so you have ARES, Amateur Radio Emergency Services. And what that is, it's the group comprised of the SEC licensed operators, and they have registered their capabilities and their equipment for helping during an emergency. Now, whenever they are helping, that would be called RACES, which is the Radio Amateur Civilian Emergency Service. It started back with, I think, World War I, with helping out with, with civil defense communications. RACES is not a group, that is what you do. So that's the big difference to that, right? So the ARES is the group, RACES is how you help. So you have to register for RACES to be able to help the ARES. So essentially you're telling the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, yes, I'm available to help, just let me know, right? Columbus ARC is our local ARES group, and if you remember on that repeater list that I had, it did list ARES for one of the night. So that is the weekly check-in for that group. And they're the group that calls out whenever there's severe weather. They're the ones that actually form their net. They'll be like, hey guys, we got bad weather. Go ahead and report what you see, if there's anything, major, and then, they provide that communication. And so the handbook for the Amateur Radio Emergency Service is super cool. It's a very detailed handbook. It gives you all the information you want to get a backpack with all your emergency gear in it, like your go bag, to be able to respond to emergencies with your radio. So I thought it's a very, very good resource, and I can get you a copy if you're interested. It's also on their website. But yeah, we do have our Indiana group for that. We have our Bartholomew County coordinator. I mean, I have the guy's telephone number, email address, and call sign. I can call him at any time on the radio, and he listens. So, and my mouse is gone. Here it is. Another good website, just for emergency preparedness in general, is ready.gov. They have a lot of information to help you, form an emergency plan with your family, just to stay informed, how to build an emergency supply kit, and how to get involved with your community with emergency preparedness. So it's a good resource to go and check out. Some other emergency training that's out there, you do have CERT teams, which is the Community Emergency Response Teams. I'm actually CERT certified. Wow, that's difficult to say. But I have my certification with that. I don't think there's any local CERT teams. There's like one that's in Edinburgh. Is that associated with Atterbury at all?
It was the Sea Cadets up there used to have one. I don't think it's functional anymore.
Not functional anymore. So I'd love to see a local CERT team. It doesn't really make sense for me to form one because I'm with, the fire department. So when there's an emergency, I'm going to be with the fire department, right? But for, anyone who's not involved with groups like that and they want to get involved, a CERT team would be cool to form. There's not one in Brown County either, Keenan. Be awesome to see. But with the CERT teams, they might call for ham radio operators to help with communication, right? That they would call for races, and part of the ARS would be a CERT team doing that. So they have some good training though. You also have the COM Academy. COM Academy is an emergency communications and amateur radio conference. They have YouTubes available for free for all the year events. They do like a yearly event. Just some good videos on like what's out there, what gear people are using, how they're responding, how they're helping. So it's a cool resource. So let's get real nerdy, right? Just a few more things here. So this is my Christmas gift from my father. It's called Software Defined Radio. I have plugged into my computer right now. It's the exact same dongle, $25 dongle, right? This is what really got me started in the radio. It's a really, really nerdy thing. But essentially what you can do with it is it's a piece of hardware that you install on your computer that lets you be able to receive radio signals, right? So that's what my bunny ears are hooked up to right now. It's actually hooked up to my computer. And so the reason why I think this is cool is it lets you visualize a lot that otherwise you wouldn't be able to visualize easier. So this is FM radio, like 103.3. Right, so you can actually sit here and listen to that radio wave on your computer, and you can see like what's the bandwidth, what's the modulation, what's the frequency. It's a lot of stuff that's, it's kind of difficult to visualize until you actually start playing with it, and then you can exactly see what's going on, which is what I thought was really interesting, like the electrical side of it. So with FM, obviously these bands are huge, right? They're real loud, nasty signals out there. That's why it's licensed so heavily, and there's only so many radio stations that can broadcast at one time, else they start butting up against each other and causing interference. This is what ham radio looks like. It's tiny, right? The bandwidth on that's insanely small. This is the 2-meter band right here. And so it does not require a lot to do it. So here's actually my application here. I'm actually running this right now. I'm gonna go and call up my radio. And you can actually see it, which I thought was pretty cool. Let's see. If I get on the right station, I think I'm on their local repeater right now. I gotta get on the 2-meter talk. Remember 146.520? K89 RWK radio check. So you can see my signal. I think that's super cool. It's really nerdy, like I said, but it lets you visualize what you're doing on the radio. And you can record that. You can play it back.
The 2 meters is how tall those waves are?
Yeah, it's the band plan, right? The 2-meter band, which are like frequencies starting at this frequency and ending this frequency, is what that is.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's not the height, it's the length.
Yeah, it's the wavelength.
Gotcha. From one cycle?
One cycle. Rise, fall, drop, back up to your target.
And so with an RTL SDR, which is what this is, there's a lot of weird applications you can do with it that I think is really interesting. Obviously, there's tons of stuff on the screen here. One thing you can do with it that I think is cool, it's called SSTV, or Slow Scan TV. Oops, I've gone too far. I have a little video on how that works. If I can find my mouse. Oh my gosh. Nope, it's down here. There it is. Turn that down just a little bit. So that signal you're hearing right now is what's being displayed on the screen. That's the frequency modulation. And what you can do is you can transmit images to each other super long distance over your radio.
Computer decodes it in terms of
Yeah.
image.
And so Spock here on the left, that's SSTV. That was a transmitted message. And this is all on like high frequency, right? The super long distance communications you can do. These messages are floating back and forth like constantly. A lot of people collect them. It's just kind of cool to capture and be able to save it. And you can get real detailed, as you can see. Something I had no idea you could do on the radio until I started looking into it.
It's television.
Yeah. Now, you can do live video feeds with this as well. Not only can you transmit pictures, but you can do something like frames per minute. I mean, it's not going to be fluid, but you can do it, right? And so one thing I've always thought would be really cool to do is to get a weather balloon with a transmitter, go up, and then you can get like a bird's eye view of what's going on, right? And that'd be cool for, like, example, like disaster response, right? You could, because an airplane or a drone, with a drone, you're going to get like 2-3 minutes. It's going to be super high def, but your drone batteries are not going to last very long. We've got an airplane, you have to worry about fuel. You're constantly flying over back and forth. But if you get a balloon with a string on it, you could sit there and do video for days of what's going on below you. So I always thought it'd be a fun science experiment to do. That's on my to-do list right now, is to transmit from a weather balloon. Let's see here.
Anybody in your club have a weather balloon? You can have to talk to people up and call it.
They're $20 on Amazon.
Oh, just to send the antenna up in the weather balloon? You don't go up in it?
Well, no, just the antenna. It's $20 for the balloon on Amazon, and I called the local grocery store and they said they'd fill it up for $15. I don't think they realize how much 200 liters of helium is, but they said they could do it for $15. So.
Get it while the getting's good.
Now, I did mention like the International Space Station did transmit occasionally. They'll send postcards down. And so these are captured images from the space station. We just missed the Christmas event. These aren't the Christmas images, but these are similar images. But they're just, the International Space Station is passing by, transmitting these postcards for anyone to receive. And people, there are so many you could collect, and if you collect them all, you could actually redeem with the AMSAT for like a special token or something, and they'd give you as a reward. So
To do that, you need that dongle and the computer?
you can do it with this, actually.
You can get the
Yep.
postcards?
Yep. You'd have to record it, so kind of put it up your phone, right? And there's an app for your phone that will decode it for you.
Oh, cool.
It's a free app, so you don't actually need a dongle for that, but so something else that I was really proud of is this image on your left here is a satellite feed that I was able to capture on this exact antenna right here. And you can see the storm system coming in. I had a lot of interference on the bottom there. I actually found that was I had a dual monitor set up. My monitor on my right was causing interference. And I only detected that once I turned it off and the signal cleared up. But at that point, the satellite had already passed, so it was a little bit too late. But that's a satellite capture. I captured myself. I'm very proud of that. You can get ultra clear pictures with that if you have your.
It actually puts the state lines on it as well.
No, that's your software that'll do that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
What you're seeing is the cloud cover coming over?
Yeah, you see the cloud cover. You can actually introduce artificial color to this as well to make it a little bit easier to read, filters for it, but you can get live satellite feed, which is very cool. Essentially it's just like the Doppler effect through the rain, right? Or through the it's bouncing the signal, and you'll get really good signal in some areas and bad other. I think that's how it's doing that. It's just the radio and how it propagates through the sky, and you're able to kind of see what it's doing.
We have pretty localized weather in Brown County. If I just got the square that is Brown County, I could see what's coming from the west and prepare like 5 minutes.
This is about as close up as you can get.
That is.
Yep. With this particular satellite, this is NOAA 19. There's different satellites you can capture that give different parts of the United States. This is the one that I captured because it was the one that I liked the best. It would be nice to see one a little bit more west when the storms are coming in from. But I mean, even with this would give you several hours notice of severe weather.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When are we gonna get to use the walkie-talkies?
At the very end, I promise. Another cool feature you can do with these dongles that I thought was pretty cool is you can track airplanes. I got a video on that, and it is very cool.
Is that because we're bouncing radio waves off of?
Yep. No, because the planes transmit their
own signal.
Their own signal, yeah.
Software-defined radios are gaining in popularity, and it's not hard to see why. They are cheap, and using them, your computer can tune into an enormous range of frequencies, including FM radio, unencrypted police and fire bands, aircraft transponders, and even digital TV. With an inexpensive RTL, SDR, USB dongle, and properly configured software, you can track commercial airplane flights and output their location to mapping software. In this weekend project, we'll do just that, and do it using a very affordable single-board computer, the BeagleBone Black.
It's kind of like this, but not that. So
You'll need the following parts to build this.
you can see what you need. All you need is the little radio adapter, your computer, and some software.
The BeagleBone and the software will run. Start by plugging in the SDR dongle, the Ethernet cable.
It's a little Raspberry Pi they're using.
Power the BeagleBone Black. Connect to the Beagle over SSH. If you're on a Windows computer, you may need to download PuTTY, a free SSH client. Then be sure to update your BeagleBone, and then verify that your radio is connected.
This is just setting their computer up, essentially.
USB. Debian doesn't include a compiled package for the software-defined radio, so we'll need to build one from the source code. We'll start by installing CMake, a compiler favored by a number of open-source projects.
I don't care. Get to the cool part. It's almost there, I promise.
Software to do our plane tracking, dump 1090. Grab the source from the repo and compile it. For fun, run dump 1090 from the console window and watch the screen get flooded with data. This is all the raw data being intercepted by the software-defined radio. Close out of the program, and let's find a better way to visualize the data. Run dump 1090 again, but this time in interactive mode, with the web interface running on port 8081. Then launch a web browser on your computer.
Here's the cool part.
The BeagleBone's web interface on port 80.
So that's an airplane right there.
From here, you can see a marker for each airborne plane plotted on a Google map. Clicking on each marker reveals information about the current longitude, latitude, and airspeed. That's it. Your BeagleBone is now tracking every aircraft you can find in your local airspace. Since the project is open source, you can adapt it or take it further, like Malcolm Robb's hack, which shows the plane's flight path and offers a dark.
You can get flight pass.
Would we need internet to do that? Or can you do that?
No, all offline with just your radio. So that's that. I thought it was pretty interesting. It'd be cool if you live near an airport. I mean, you could get a lot more information. There's not a whole lot of planes that fly over me, but especially up north, you can get like all that airplane information going on, which I think would be cool.
And would that just be commercial flights? And,
Yep.
And so like military planes might not do that.
They typically don't broadcast what they're doing. Yeah. The last thing that you can do with this, before I'll stop with the RTL SDR nerd talk here, is radio astronomy. Radio astronomy is pretty interesting what you can do. The big three things I found you can do it is the hydrogen line. Does anyone know what the hydrogen line is of our galaxy? It's like what frequency our galaxy sounds like if you put a radio up to it. And so you can capture that. Let's see here. I'd like to hit play, please. There we go.
Sound kind of groovy.
So that's it. That's the hydrogen line right there. So you're capturing the sound of the Milky Way galaxy.
Doesn't space has no noise. You can't hear anything in space.
In space, no one can hear you scream. But you can hear the hydrogen line. See, as the galaxy rotates, the hydrogen line will change depending on like what our plane is with the rest of the galaxy. So that's pretty much it for this video. The other thing you do is you can track meteors. When meteors fly through our atmosphere, they'll emit radio signals. And so you can capture that. And this is the Gemini meteor shower. With just a simple, you saw this antenna, it's not a very crazy antenna. And that's a meteor right there. You can kind of see the SDR chart like I was showing you earlier. Yeah, that's the exact one I have. Oh, we get it. Move on.
Are they just creating a frequency because it passes through the ionosphere, or what's?
Yeah, antenna. Yeah. When it hits the atmosphere, it ionizes the atmosphere, and then it. I'm not quite sure why it does this. I just know it does. But yeah, you can see it on the chart. That frequency right there. That's the meteor when it's flashing through the sky. So you're listening to meteors essentially. The other thing you can do that's a little bit more advanced is you can you have to have a bigger antenna for this, but you can detect the pulsars out in space. Right, the pulsars will emit the radio waves, and you can capture that if you have a big enough antenna. You can also measure the size of the galaxy, and that's what that picture is on the left there. They used radio to figure out how big the galaxy is.
You said it travels how fast, these radio waves?
300 million meters per second.
So the speed of light?
No, not the. Yeah, the speed of light.
Same as speed of light?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's pretty cool.
Wow. 186,000 miles per second.
Yeah, so I guess the radio waves are a little bit slower, but. So what do you do next if you're interested in learning more, right? So register with the FCC, get your FRN number. You'll need that FRN number to take your test. There's tons and tons and tons of study resources out there. You could dust off the old book like Tebin did. There's also websites you can go to. hamexam.org is completely free. It's just the test pool to help you memorize the questions. I did mine through hamradioprep.com. I studied for a couple hours each night for a week, and I was able to get it. It didn't take a whole lot. For the next 2 Thursdays, all people coming in here, and we're just going to go over hamradioprep.com content, because they have a nice little course you can go through, and we'll just use my account, and I'll go through it here. To register the test, you can do that through the ARRL website. And if you have a radio, I'm happy to program it, like I said, with all the channels that I have pre-programmed for this local area with my Chirp software. That way you don't have to try to program them manually. Oh, that's it.
Really short. Thank you.
So you can see this is a very varied hobby. A lot of different aspects to it that you might interest you. So hopefully it was worth your time to show up tonight, and hope you have some interest in the hobby now. So thank you very much.
We'll play with the radios now.
Yeah, we can play with the radios.